Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet there. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic live here on Bloomberg Business Week. Well, Donald Trump, the president-elect, of course, unveiled picks for two key posts on his economic team. We're talking about Kevin Hassett to direct the National Economic Council, and then Jamieson Greer as the U.S. Trade Representative. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Both men, by the way, alums of the first Trump administration, both will be very involved in two areas that the president-elect campaigned on. We're talking about tariffs and taxes, both areas, as we know, that can impact the U.S. economy, and Tim, also the fiscal picture.
Look, incredibly important. And we need to know as much as we can about both of these picks. So we got with us a Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst, Nathan Dean. He joins us from Washington, D.C. As Carol mentioned, Nathan, these guys, no stranger to working in the government or working in the Trump White House. We've known Kevin Hassett for years, well known to the Bloomberg audience. We've talked with him over the years. So let's start with him because Trump nominated him to direct the National Economic Council. Remind everyone what this job is about and what he's going to bring to it.
So the National Economic Council, think of them as the wing of the White House that implements the president's economic policies. It's certainly a policy position. This differs than what Kevin did earlier at the Council of Economic Advisors. Think of them as the consultancy. So what the NEC chair does is that, for the first half of 2025, Kevin Hassett's going to be really involved in the tax reform debate. Probably tariffs, not so much, but trying to persuade Republicans to embrace this multi-trillion-dollar tax extension package, which has to happen, which we think is going to cost around between $4 to $4.5 trillion. So I think the tax debate is certainly going to be more interesting for a lot of companies and so forth in terms of whether the corporate tax rate goes up and down. And Kevin will be the White House's man on the Hill trying to push that going forward.
So do these individuals, Nathan, just basically say, okay, President, this is what you want. I'm going to the Hill and this is what I'm going to do. Or do they say, hey, Mr. President, maybe you want to think about this?
It's going to be the latter. But, as we're telling our clients right now with the tariff debate, it's ultimately President Trump that's going to make the decision on a lot of this. They certainly are going to advise. And I think we're entering what's called the soap opera era of the White House because you have essentially three different wings of the advisors coming together. You have the pro-tariff wing, which Jamieson Greer will be a member of. You have the pro-immigration reform wing. And then you also have the Wall Street friendly wing. And each one of those wings is going to be trying to advise the president saying, hey, maybe go tougher on tariffs, or hey, maybe let's focus more on economic growth here. But ultimately, it will be President Trump's decision. And obviously the folks that serve at the pleasure of the president will then try and implement that.
Is there any way to view tariffs as Wall Street friendly?
Obviously, we always tell our clients there's a risk and an opportunity for anything that happens in Washington. And certainly that can be the same for trade and tariffs. But we're also telling our clients is that, look, the tariffs are a negotiation tool. When President Trump said that he wants to put tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico, there was a real risk or an opportunity there. However, when he signs those executive orders on day one, most likely in that executive order will be language saying to the Commerce Department, go forth and conduct a study. And those tariffs are probably going to be 3, 5, 6 months down the line. At the same time, every lobbyist in Washington is going to be trying to influence the White House to say, hey, let's exempt autos, or hey, let's exempt solar, and let's exempt this. So I will just say that the tariff process is a long process, and it's a negotiation process because President Trump is a transactional president, and it depends on the deal. So as this process continues, certainly some sectors of the industry could be at the benefit of others if they were able to get those exemptions or if they were to try and negate some of the risk that's associated with the tariff.
Hey, you guys, I've got a win for you. I'm looking at small caps. They're up about 7.5% since Donald Trump was reelected to the White House. That compares with about just under a 4% gain in the S&P 500. So more tariffs we've talked about could be certainly potentially beneficial to small cap domestically run companies here in the United States that maybe don't worry so much about stuff coming in and out or might benefit by stuff not coming in or being more expensive that comes in. So there is definitely a play. And we've heard so much about different strategists talking about small caps. What do we need to know about Kevin Hassett? He's worked in so many different forms outside of government, but what he did during the first Trump White House. Nathan, we talk about guardrails being there, the checks and balances of the U.S. government. What do we know about Kevin Hassett from that first go-round that might give us an idea of how he runs his position if he assumes it after the nomination process and approval process? How do we think he might play out, I guess is my question.
Yeah, so obviously you bring up a great point. There's largely three ways things get done in Washington. It's legislation, which doesn't happen very often, minus the reconciliation package that will probably happen next year. regulation or deregulation, and that takes time. It takes quarters. And then you have executive orders, which mostly are symbolic in nature outside of areas where the presidency is more powerful, like trade and tariffs. But when it comes to Kevin Hassett's position in its new role, the NEC chair doesn't really have much in the way of implementation authority. A lot of it's going to have to rely on Congress and or the Departments of Treasury or Commerce or Jamieson Greer over at the Trade Representative to implement that vision. So Kevin's going to have to do a lot of work in terms of massaging egos and trying to influence behaviors and so forth like that, because ultimately the NEC role is an advisory role. And then, just in terms of the other agencies that are out there that are going to be implementing trade and tariffs and so forth like that, President Trump usually works at the 100,000-foot level. It's the secretaries and the undersecretaries and the assistant secretaries that have to figure it out at the 10,000-foot level. And that's where we go through the proposal comment process and so forth. Where I'm going with this is that for a lot of what President Trump wants to do, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of, we're going to get a lot of notice before these things actually impact the bottom line in terms of where ultimately the impact is and if it's a risk or an opportunity.
Well, let's talk about this risk, or I think a lot of people are arguing it's a risk. We're out in San Francisco at the Schwab Impact event, and one theme kept coming up over and over again was immigration reform, and actually concerns about the president-elect, when he becomes president again, carrying out his promise to deport up to 11 million people who are here illegally, and the effect that would have on the economy. How are you looking at this at Bloomberg Intelligence from the perspective of, okay, this is something that is or is not feasible, and two, what would the effect on the economy be?
Yeah, obviously there would be a huge economic impact, and certainly potentially an inflationary impact as well if you were to take 13 million undocumented workers from the United States economy, and along with their buying, selling, and supply and demand and so forth like that. So outside of the humanitarian side of things, the economic side, it's going to be very much a logistical challenge for the president to move up to that goal of 1 million individuals per year. The reason being is that he has staffed his picks with pro-immigration reform candidates that on day one will signify this is where we're going. But the logistical challenges aren't just there. I mean, if you saw private prison stocks, for example, they went up 20 to 25% right after the election. What the idea here is that they would have to be contracted to pay for detention centers. You're going to see a lot of fights between, say, Chicago and New York and the federal government over federal funding. But ultimately, it is going to take time. It's going to take a significant amount of time to get up to that 1 million or even further to their goal of 3 million per year. And at the same time, you're going to have CEOs. For example, there was a CEO earlier this week in California, for example, saying, look, I rely on a lot of this labor. It's going to cost me more, and you're going to cut out my labor supply and make things even more difficult. So that economic message is certainly going to be going into the White House as this process plays out. And again, it's ultimately to the folks who are whispering in Trump's ear, and he makes that final decision. But as much as he wants immigration reform, he also wants stocks in the green, and he's got to figure out how to manage the two.
Yeah, you talk to folks in the hospitality industry and construction, right? They're saying, listen, I need workers. And people are worried about, I agree with you. I feel like even when we talk to smaller and medium-sized companies, you hear that from leaders about they're concerned about having access to a workforce. Jamieson Greer, what do we need to know? Tariffs a very big part, as you've talked about already, of the Trump campaign. What else do we need to know about Jamieson Greer?
So Jamieson Greer was the chief of staff to Robert Lighthizer when he was the trade representative during the first administration. He's currently a lawyer and a partner with one of the law firms here in Washington. But what I would say is he's very much pro-tariff and very much skeptical of free trade and very much indicative of President Trump's goals. If he's in this position, Jamieson Greer will be the individual that's negotiating both on these bilateral discussions with other countries and also memberships of things like the World Trade Organization, the WTO. But ultimately, just remember again, he serves at the pleasure of the president, and it will be President Trump who I think will be taking more of the indirect role in these negotiations, because for President Trump, it's always a transaction, it's a deal. And if, for example, when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls President Trump, hours after he makes this statement, that was the beginning of the negotiation between the United States and Canada, and obviously the Mexican response as well in terms of this being an economic this could be an economic problem for both countries. It's just the start of the negotiation. So I think Jamieson Greer in that role as trade representative will certainly be the one working with his counterparts abroad, but he'll also be advising the president and trying to convince the president to move forward with this tariff position and or potentially pull it back in terms of an economic issue.
Nathan, we spoke to Henrietta Treyz over at Beta Partners yesterday, and she essentially said, find me an example of a tariff that the president-elect, when he was president 2017 to 2021, in his first term, threatened but didn't put on. The idea that, there is actually something to his threats when it comes to tariffs here. Do you believe, and does the team over at Bloomberg Intelligence think that this threat is any different?
No, absolutely. We agree with Henrietta. I mean, if you remember, President Trump spoke with Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwait a few weeks ago in the city of Chicago, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, the tariff is my favorite word. He's not bluffing. I mean, this is certainly something that falls into the American first policy, where when he's conducting these negotiations, he comes in and he believes with a position of strength. And if the other countries that are negotiating with him don't, respond in a way where they try to come to a deal, President Trump has will have no issues laying a tariff of this type on another country, because per that idea that, this is a process that'll take months to implement, it's just another way to increase the negotiation stance, increase the leverage. But if a deal can't be made, those tariffs are a real risk or an opportunity, depending on where you are on the side of the trade.
Nathan, 30 seconds left here. Michael McKee just talking about the economy that President Donald Trump inherits, actually probably better than maybe he expected. His policies, it's up to him to kind of whether or not maintain this economy or possibly create some stress on it as a result of whatever policies he puts into effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of talk about deregulation, for example, and a lot of market sentiment in the market right now about deregulation.
Right.
But we just note that deregulation takes time. It's not going to be a magical wand. It's going to take quarters, if not years. So just in terms of expectations, there's only so much the president can do immediately. The rest of it's going to have to come out over the next 2 to 3 years and 4 years of his term.
Nathan Dean, have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you so much. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst Nathan Dean right there in D.C. All right, still to come, the little engine.